Once again, very warm welcome to all of our attendees. We just want to start off with the continually preventing COVID-19, and these are your tips to continue to do that. Washing your hands regularly with soap and water for 20 seconds. And if this is not available, try and keep an alcohol-based hand sanitizer with you at all times, and then avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth if you have not washed your hands. Adhere to social distancing measures where you have to, but also avoid close contact with any person that is sick. Please cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow or a tissue, and then throw that tissue into the bin and clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces. Now, if you haven't started yet with a policy on COVID-19, please ensure you have that readily available, as we know that the new regulations that have come out, especially looking at COVID-19, it is an occupational disease, and so they are encouraging companies to ensure that they have this as soon as possible. If you do need assistance with that, please reach out and we can give you some guidance on some template formats that we have for you. So last week we looked at basic first aid, and now we're going to be looking at basic firefighting. So our safety thought for this week is the motto for housekeeping: everything has a place, so everything in its place. And this is also going to go a long way in preventing incidents and accidents. And that's essentially what we are trying to do when it comes to health and safety, is the prevention of incidents and accidents from exposing ourselves as well as our employees or others to any dangers. So the work that we do, any type of tools that we are using or machines that we have to operate, expose ourselves to certain risks and hazards. And we don't want to then unnecessarily expose others to that. So if we can, do your part in housekeeping this week, and we'll see how that goes hand in hand with basic firefighting as well. Remember, the best firefighting technique is always fire prevention. But fire needs three things in order to exist or to come about. It needs oxygen, heat, and fuel. So in our natural atmosphere, there is 20.8% oxygen in our air that we breathe. A fire only needs 16% oxygen to survive. Now, when we speak about heat, we obviously speak about it in Celsius, and then fuel comes in different forms. It could either be solid materials, liquid material, or gas. Now, you might think to yourself, but this is always available in and around the area. In fact, even where you're sitting at the moment, there is oxygen. There is definitely 16% oxygen. In fact, if there were any less than 19% where you were sitting at the moment, it would be defined as an oxygen deficient atmosphere, because a human needs to have 20.8% oxygen in order to survive. As soon as it starts getting lower than 19%, it is an oxygen deficient atmosphere. And then getting as low as 16%, it could become very dangerous for a human to be in that atmosphere. And yet we can see a fire will continue to survive. Then there's heat all around us. There's heat sources all around us. There could be electronic equipment. It could even be the type of work that we are doing. Now, as a plumber, you are going to be performing a lot of hot work. And most of your clients will be requesting hot works permits in order to determine what is the heat source and what are you doing to prevent that heat source from breaking out into a fire. And then the different fuels. Perhaps what you are working on is not flammable, but the area around you might have materials that are flammable. So your fuel source could be solid materials such as paper, cardboard boxes, even wood, or anything around you that could be solid and has a flash point that is low enough to be able to ignite because of the work that you are performing. Then you have different types of liquids that we work with. Things like petrol. If we're using a generator because of load shedding, this is obviously a flammable liquid. And then there's various types of gases. Many of you use butane gases or different types of gases when you are doing soldering, and these are also flammable gases. Now, oftentimes you have to create a fire in order to do your work, such as when you are soldering. But that is a controlled fire. So what are we talking about with firefighting? Well, these are fires that are unwanted. In other words, there's a fire that is created on the site, and you need to then put this out before it becomes uncontrollable. Anytime you are taught basic firefighting, in fact, if you've done the basic firefighting course with ourselves, you would know that you only fight the fire at the beginning stages. As soon as it becomes out of control, it is best just to then evacuate the building. So when we talk about basic firefighting or firefighting in today's Toolbox Talk, we are only talking about things that are within your control. If it is not within your control, then we just ask you to please leave it up to the professionals. But fire can spread in 3 ways. Now, the reason why it's good to know this information is, first of all, knowing what a fire is made up of: heat, fuel, and oxygen. You know how to then fight a fire. In other words, you can take one of those things away and you won't have a fire. Knowing how fire spreads will also assist you in then determining your housekeeping, making sure that you do not keep combustible materials next to each other, because fire will spread with conduction, convection, and radiation. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, you will see conduction. In other words, it conducts even through walls because of the heat source. So if the fire gets hot enough, it could heat up combustible materials on the other side of a wall or in another room. This conduction, obviously when it's touching something, the wall doesn't catch a light because it can retain that amount of heat. Its flash point is a lot higher than perhaps the boxes of the paper on the other side of that wall. Which means if you have fought a fire in a specific area, look around and just do an inspection to see, has the fire potentially spread to other parts of the building? Because we never want to put it out in one area and have it spread to another without us knowing. And then when it comes to convection, we understand that heat rises. Now, you might understand the word convection better when it comes to an actual oven. An electric oven is a convection oven, so it heats up most of the time from the bottom. If you want to grill, you can put the top on. But if it heats from the bottom, the heat then rises through the food. It hits the top of the oven, and then it turns in a circular motion, coming down the side of the oven wall again. And as it comes down, it gets to the heat source again, and so it heats up again. And this continual motion of circular movement of hot air will then rise and fall until it has obviously cooked your meal. Now, in convection with fire, it does the same thing, but the heat will rise into the ceiling. The problem is, in the ceiling, sometimes we also have combustible materials. And if the heat gets a lot hotter, and there is something that has a heat temperature point where it can start flashing off or it can turn into a fire, then the fire then spreads from one floor to the next floor. Or if it's a single floor, it will then take out the roof. And that's why many times you'll see houses that burn down have 4 walls sitting there, but no roof, no ceiling. All of that has already burnt away purely because of the convection of a fire. But fire also spreads with radiation. Now, radiation means it doesn't have to be touching another object in order for it to then start burning somewhere else. So many of you had a bra this past weekend if it wasn't raining in your area. And if you did, you didn't have to actually touch the coals to feel that it was hot. You could just put your hand a few centimeters away from it to actually feel the heat. Now, the hotter the heat, the further away you will have to stand in order to feel the effects of that heat. And this is what we call radiation. It will radiate out that heat from the actual fire. This also depends on what is burning. So sometimes you will have something that's burning that is almost like a colder burn. And then you'll have something that is a very hot burn. Now, it will depend on the fuel source that is actually burning. But knowing how it spreads helps us to understand our theme for this week of housekeeping. Keep things in its place because everything has a place. That means we do not want to have combustible material, cardboard boxes, any packaging that we might be using for our work to then lay around. Perhaps it's a good idea now to start taking a look at our storerooms. Before we go away in December time on our break, we want to make sure that everything in our offices, what about the back of our vans, inside our cabs? What is the housekeeping looking like there? Because fire could spread very quickly if our housekeeping is also not in place. Now, when it comes to the different fire classes, we always have different fire equipment in order to fight different fire classes. You might think to yourself, well, why is that? Why can't we just have one thing, a huge hose reel that just puts out all fires? Well, hose reels are provided. In fact, when you call out the fire department, they will generally come just with a huge fire truck filled with water, and they will put out every type of fire with copious amounts of water. But you might think to yourself, when it comes to a small fire, that is when the fire class is very important. For instance, perhaps you're watching this Toolbox Talk on your phone or tablet, or perhaps a laptop or a PC, and that is an electronic device. Now, if you had to use a DCP fire extinguisher or a dry chemical powder, in other words, that DCP will then smother the flames. It will then prevent that fire on your electronic device from moving further than where it is currently. So the piece of equipment that you're using obviously is not going to be working anymore, and that's understandable. But let's use water. So a glass of water or a jug of water, perhaps, that you have close to you, and you throw that now on your electronic device. Well, yes, you're going to put out the flame, but you could cause other potential problems. You see, now water mixing with electricity can cause electrocution. It can cause a short in the electricity. It could even burn out your DB board because of the water and electronic current that doesn't mix. So yes, when it becomes a huge fire, a building is on flame, we cannot run in with a fire extinguisher. Then the fire department obviously will just use a water truck in order to do that. But when it comes to basic firefighting, we must understand which fire extinguisher we can use. And if you don't have a fire extinguisher, try and identify a different firefighting medium that you can use. So the best way to understand this is to know the A, B, C, D, and K class fires. And if you look on the bottom right hand of the screen, if you are able to see that, these fire classes are broken up into ordinary, flammable, electric, metal, and cooking. So A leaves an ash. That's easy to remember. So paper, wood, coal, things like that will leave ash. And that's an A class fire. Anything that boils is a class B, such as flammable liquids. Then you have an electrical current. So if it's a current, then it's an electrical fire. If it is a dense material, such as heavy metals, so beams, I-beams, purlins, things like that, that is dense material, and that is a class D fire. And then a class K is the old class E or class F as it was originally known. It's now been changed to class K to understand that this is what happens in a kitchen. These are such as cooking oils, greases, or fats that we'll find in a kitchen, because they burn at a lot higher heat than your normal flammable B-class fires, things that boil. So when it comes to the kitchen, obviously, there is a different type of firefighting medium. Now, in order to know how to fight a fire, you must understand what is actually burning. Because in order to know what is burning, in order to fight the fire, you need to know what is burning so that you have the right type of extinguisher. There are three different extinguishers that you might find. On the left-hand side, you've got a carbon dioxide extinguisher. This is a CO2. Now, you'll know CO2 or carbon dioxide is a very cold, it's like an icy type of chemical. So dry ice is made up of carbon dioxide. Now, dry ice doesn't melt. You'll know it just evaporates. So if you've ever had an ice cream guy coming around to your house, I remember them when I was a lot younger and you used to take your ice cream out there. He always had this big white block of ice inside there. But it didn't melt into water. It just evaporated into nothing, basically. But it kept everything very cold. And some people call it hot ice because it's very hot to the touch. It's not really hot. It just burns your actual skin because of the chemical that it's made out of. So when we use a CO2 or a carbon dioxide one, this is going to rapidly cool down the fire. But because it doesn't have any liquid, it's very good to be used on electronic fires. So if you had an electronic device that was a light, such as your PC or phone that you're busy using at the moment, a carbon dioxide is preferably the one you would want to use. Now, on the right-hand side, we've got the old fire extinguishers that had water in them. These are pretty much being done away with, and older buildings are taking them out and replacing them with the bottom right-hand type of fire extinguisher, the DCP fire extinguisher. DCP standing for dry chemical powder. So there is a powder inside, and you probably saw it when you did your firefighting training. And this powder is non-toxic, but as soon as you open it, you can just see that that powder goes everywhere. So let's take a look at a DCP fire extinguisher. And the reason why we are using the DCP is because it's the most commonly used one and the most widely available one. You'll notice on the left-hand side picture, there is the actual fire extinguisher itself from Safequip. It's a 9 kg standard DCP fire extinguisher. But you'll notice in the middle of the block, the middle of that tag, it's first of all white and blue. And if it's a white and blue tag, we know automatically it's a DCP fire extinguisher. If it's a white and black one, it's a CO2. And if it's just white or white and red, we know that's water. And if it's a white and yellow one, we then know that that's a foam fire extinguisher. So if it's a blue label, as you can see it over there, this is a DCP fire extinguisher. And those little red blocks in the middle actually show what class of fire it can fight. From the left hand starting A, middle B, and at the end C. So if you weren't sure and your training was a few years ago or last year and you've actually forgotten the different classes, perhaps you'll even forget this Toolbox talk in the next week on which class a fire is. Well, don't fret, because actually on the fire extinguisher, it will tell you what fire it will be able to put out. So do yourself a favor before there's a fire. In fact, we want to prevent fires as much as possible, but before there's a fire, go and check what type of fire extinguishers you have, and then know how to use them as well, because it'll even give you a little instruction on how to use this fire extinguisher on the actual label. Now, your DCP is the one that comes with a pressure gauge, as you can see in the middle of the screen, and that ranges between 10.5 and 18 bars of pressure. And we always want to keep it, as you can see there, in the cylinder full area. If it's not in the green area, if it's either empty or overpressurized, this is an incorrect type of fire extinguisher. It cannot be used. So yes, this is left up to your firefighter or your fire equipment inspector. That has to be checked every single month. But why not check it yourself? Remember, you're going to be the one using this fire extinguisher. So if it's not adequately available for you to use, potentially you are going to be the one that has the problem when you need to put out the fire. So please have a look at that. So let's take a look at our different types of fire extinguishers. You've got your DCP, as we mentioned. This is a dry chemical powder. All right, so we are filling these fire extinguishers with potassium bicarbonate, and this is kept under nitrogen pressure. So nitrogen basically pressurizes this to a certain bars, and that's why when you pull the trigger on the top, when you squeeze that handle at the top, that's what actually pressurizes the dry chemical powder to come out. That's the most widely used extinguisher, as we mentioned, because it is effective against A, B, and C fires, which is your most common fires that you are going to find, especially being a plumber. So A, anything that turns to ash, so it can be used on charcoal, can be used on wood, paper, boxes. Then it's anything that boils. So if you do have a petrol spill and the petrol catches alight, it can be used on a B class fire. It can also be used on C class fires, which is a current fire. Anything with a current, that's an electrical fire. So it can also be used. There is a downfall. If it's used indoors, the powder can obscure your vision and also damage goods and machinery because it gets into places. So it won't create more fire. It will definitely put the fire out by smothering. It's non-toxic, so it's not going to harm a person, but it does make a huge mess. Now, you might ask yourself, instead of burning down the place, you're just going to have to clean up white powder for a little while. That's a lot better than having a fire. So yes, there are pros and cons with each fire extinguisher, but your DCP is the most widely used and probably the most commonly used one when it comes to small flames in and around our working space. So this is probably going to be the one that you will take with you when you're doing hot works as a plumber. As we mentioned, you got your CO2, your DCP, your carbon dioxide, black label CO2 fire extinguisher. It's non-flammable gas. They're highly pressurized. So these don't have gauges on them because carbon dioxide or CO2 is its own pressurizer. So the CO2 that's inside there already pressurizes itself. Now, CO2 is very, very cold, so please be careful. That's why you see it's got a huge horn on the front. It's not the same as the DCP. You must hold it there. It will have a little bit of a static charge, but the reason why you hold it there and not closer down to the bottom is it does freeze. And as you mentioned, people call it hot ice because it can burn the skin. So please be very careful when using this type of extinguisher, but it is great to be used on electrical apparatus. So any type of fires that have electrical can be used with this type of fire extinguisher. It's a little bit heavier than your DCP fire extinguisher, but a great tool to keep in your vehicles, especially if things in your vehicle start catching alight, because this is going to be something that rapidly cools down and will not damage any electronics. Then you've got a foam, which is the cream label. So foam obviously is going to be used inside kitchens. This is also to rapidly cool down a fire, but it uses mainly on flammable liquid, so it can be used on B, but we also use it specifically. It's been designed for a K fire. That's for anything that is inside a kitchen. Then you have hose reels. Now, hose reels are commonly found outside buildings, sometimes inside a huge building with lots of floors, and that is obviously just for bigger fires. It's used in order to just douse an entire area full with a lot of water. And most of the time, this is going to be used by the fire department, not necessarily the firefighters, unless you've been trained in the use of hose reels. And these will normally be your fire marshals for bigger companies. And then in our kitchens, often we find fire blankets. Now, we keep these in our vehicles as well, because it's good to be able to throw over anything to then suffocate the flames, especially if it is a smaller one. Sometimes if a person has caught alight, we then wrap the person in this, keeping their head out of the actual blanket, but we lay the person down first because hot air rises. And if the person is standing while the fire is there, obviously they are breathing in all of that superheated oxygen, and that could potentially be the thing that kills them, not the fire. So always lay the person down. You know, the stop, drop, and roll technique for a person. We then cover them with this blanket because that will then effectively put it out, because it is a non-flammable material that it is made out of. So how do you actually extinguish a fire? Well, again, go on your basic firefighting course and remember your PASS method. That's pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep. And on the right-hand side, you can see you pull the pin, you aim at the base of the fire, so not over on top of the fire to let the chemical settle down. You actually want to hit it at the base of the fire. You squeeze the trigger to allow the contents of that fire extinguisher to come out, and then sweep from side to side, just covering where that small fire is. So remember, test the extinguisher before you approach the fire. Keep it low, and always approach a fire with the wind at your back, never with the wind at the front, because then you could be exposed to the actual fire. And then back away, watching for rekindling. You never want that fire to start up again once you've turned your back. So what do you do during a fire? Well, before deciding to fight a fire, you need to keep certain things in mind. You must know what is burning, because if you don't know what to use as a fire extinguisher medium, then you might be using a water-based fire extinguisher and causing more damage because it's an electric fire, or it doesn't look like there's electronic devices around the fire because you can't see it. So it's good to identify what is burning. And if you're not sure, just use a DCP fire extinguisher. The cleanup will be well worth knowing that you haven't made a mistake. Now, even if you do have an ABC fire extinguisher, whichever one you have, it might be something that is inside that burning or inside that fire that could produce toxic fumes. So be very, very careful when approaching a fire, because a lot of people have smoke inhalation from fire where you're not getting severely sick or injured by the fire itself, but by the smoke that it is being let off. Now, if the fire is spreading rapidly beyond where it started, the time to use an extinguisher was always at the beginning stages of the fire. So if it is spreading quickly, it is best to just simply evacuate the building, call the emergency services, and let them take over. They are the professionals. They know how to deal with it. The most important thing is saving the life, not saving things. So please remember that there are insurance claims that you can put in for any equipment, tools, or machinery, but we cannot have an insurance for bringing back a person. So that is why next week we're going to be talking about emergency evacuation. So what do you do in an emergency to get out of a building safely? And what type of procedures should you have in place for your emergency evacuation systems? So before we go, we just want to remind you of our safety thought this week. That is, everything has a place, so everything in its place. That is our motto for housekeeping. Remember, the firefighting technique is always fire prevention. So when it comes to hot works as a plumber, please make sure you've got your hot works permits in place. You've got your procedures in place for fire prevention, as well as your firefighting methods if needed. So as an emergency situation. Again, if you guys need any information on this, if there's something you might be battling with in terms of your safety file, we might not have to do a whole safety file for you. Perhaps you only need one or two things. We've probably got templates for you. So reach out to us, safety@opsa.org or info@ohss.co.za, today, and we'll see what we can assist you with. So thanks very much again, and we can hand it over back to you, Byron.
Thank you very much. I see we don't have any questions, so we'll end off the session. Thank you, and have a blessed week.